Hello, 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 everyone. We are live today with Taking the Stage with Kristian and Quo. I'm waiting for my fabulous friend and co host to join me, so I will be patient. In the meantime, come on in the room and let's have a chit chat. There she is. Hello, everyone. I'm Kristian Roberts. I'm waiting for my fabulous friend and co host to join me. There she is. Hi, Quo.
Hello. Hello. Good day. Hi.
Hello, everyone who has joined us.
Hi,
Thank you for
everyone.
tuning in.
Thank you for joining. Let us know where you are. That has been
Yes,
some
we'd
really,
like to
really,
know
yeah,
where are you
really
tuning in from? What time is it there?
cool.
What's the weather like? Does Texas try to get a little chilly again on us?
Texas likes to pick and choose, right? How the day is gonna go, if you will.
Yeah, we just live here. We don't get to tell it what to do. So
Yeah.
I remember the time, it was probably 15 years ago, where it like snowed in April. Like my entire backyard was covered in snow. And I was like, okay, Texas. Texas is gonna Texas. And
Texas is.
not just with the weather. But we'll leave that right there.
So, hello to those who are joining. Hello, hello. We'll hold like we do for stage, right? Hold for a
Yeah,
bit.
just for a few minutes. Give everybody a chance to get settled in. Maybe you're on that lunch break. Get your sandwich.
Thank you for joining us and for joining the conversations, for always joining the conversations, and for always bringing some real context to the conversations that we have. So, we are inviting everybody, of course, as always, to join in the conversation. Drop your questions, your comments, your experiences into the space. That is what this space is for, specifically for you, specifically for us as a community, and how we look at collective solutions to the many things that we're facing, not just in opera, in the arts industry, but then in the ways in which that intersects with everything that we do in life. That's my opening spiel.
And we will dive more into that here shortly. So, welcome, welcome. Come on in the room. Have your questions ready. Tell us where you're from, what the weather is like where you are, what time it is, all of those things. We want to know who you are.
And then just in general and check in. I don't know, we haven't gotten into the show yet, and this will be something that we actually speak about as well. But the ways in which our organization and many organizations have started to make sure that we're creating belonging, that we're fostering, and that we're committed to belonging in our spaces is just a check in. So, as Christian's asking, she's like, where are you from? Where are you right now? How are things going? How are you?
Mhm.
That's our check in question that we'll do going forward whenever we do lives. Like, how are you? How are y'all feeling? How is your heart space today?
I still forget some people brave enough to respond. Come on. Be
The space is
vulnerable.
yours.
Tell us how you are.
The space is yours. If you want to sit in it, sit in it. So then, Christian, I think we've held. So if you will, so we can get
So,
started.
everybody, my name is Kristian Roberts. I'm, of course, here with my fabulous friend and co-host.
Quo host,
Co-host.
Quo Decia Johnson.
And we have come back live again for another episode of Taking the Stage with Kristian.
And Quo. Of course, we begin every episode with a commitment to our communities, with a commitment to truth telling, with a commitment to connection and reducing the harm that we have inherited. So I'd like to begin this episode with a land and people acknowledgement, as we do for all of our episodes. I do want to take the time right here, right now, in this space to acknowledge that we in Dallas are on stolen land. It was stolen, okay? We are on stolen land. We are on the land of the Caddo, of the Wichita, and of the Comanche sovereign nations. Nations that cultivated the land since time immemorial. nations and individuals and peoples and tribes that lived the full human experience, that fought, that loved, that created stories, that lived their stories. Nations that faced horrible experiences, including genocide, including policy that forced their removal from the land. I do want to take the time to acknowledge this because it's so important in how we understand where we are, but also how we understand that those nations are still here. Dallas is not alone in this, as the entire nation is on stolen land. And it's so important that we uplift and center and start to connect and heal the harm that has come out of the things that we've inherited. I also want to take the time to acknowledge the people who labored on this land to create Dallas. People were stolen from their homes and brought here and forced and enslaved into forced labor. And from that free and forced labor, we have what we call as Dallas. Myself being a descendant of enslaved individuals, my last name is Johnson, not because my ancestor's name is Johnson, same for Miss Roberts here. We want to acknowledge that and how we carry those stories with us into the space, but also acknowledging the beautiful stories that have come out of this, the continuous fight to reclaim humanity and what that means and how we do all of this together. This is part of the work, acknowledging truth, truth-telling, sharing in the space. And then acknowledging that while we have not created these things, we have inherited them, but we've also inherited the opportunity, the honor, the responsibility to start to heal the harm and to start to go forward together. So I thank you for joining me for this land and people acknowledgement.
And thank you for joining us on this live episode today. We want to always begin by thanking you always for your continued support, continuously tuning in, continuously engaging with us. Coming with your questions, coming with your comments. We welcome those in this space. We want to hear from you. We want to talk with you. We want to know about you and how you're feeling right now and what's going on in your life. We want to talk about that because nothing in society occurs in a vacuum. So that's the reason also why we have started to do the check-in. So please feel free to type in and let us know how you're doing. Shout out to the Dallas office staff as per usual for their continued support. And of course to our friend and brother who has started a new chapter in his life, David Lomeli.
Hey, David.
We wish you well, David, my friend. So Cole, let's just get into it today. This has weeks have been tough, to say the least. The last couple of weeks have given us all a lot to think about. The past couple
In this, we're acknowledging that the weight of what has happened this week and the weight of everything that has been going on this week comes into the space with us. It certainly comes into the work that we are happening in different locations. Let's talk about, I had a dear colleague say, the fact that we don't get to take a deep enough breath before the next thing happens. And so in this, and being mindful of what is going on, we named this episode Step 1,
Yep.
Because we're still very much in step one. And that's okay because foundation is good. But acknowledging that we are in the bare minimum, we're at the beginning. We are still finding our way and finding our own footing and our own path in what we're wanting to do as an industry. This comes specifically in response to the verdict, which let's acknowledge to have to be excited that something right happened for once is problematic.
Very
Does not
problematic.
take away from the beautiful work that has been done and the rewarding things that have come out of so much sacrifice. But to be able to try and catch your breath suddenly, because maybe the country's going to start doing right by everybody. That might not be proper English, but y'all know what I'm saying, okay? that
No, it's
things
true.
will suddenly, right? The breath that people exhaled, and then the lack of time in between, we had to hold our breath once more because something else happened, because it's so continuous. And my dear colleague LaRob, he was speaking to this, and that when we're in the system, it is very possible for this to be seen as an individual case and not as the effects or the symptoms of a larger system, right? So for history was made, which is saying something. As we continue to have the first of this, the first of that, we've always been here. So it's a matter of acknowledging who's been locked out and looking at the one of the very real and surreal cases and verdicts of guilty when these things have been happening. So we want to be mindful of what it means in us to be able to catch our breath, but not to be able to catch our breath for too long. And it's problematic, which is why I say we're still in step one. We're so still in step one, which is okay for now. As we move to step two, we should not continuously be in a cycle of first steps, should not continuously be in a cycle of step one. Our statements that were made last year as the entire world had to watch because we were all stuck at home, and because the entire world suddenly realizes what I call the Great Awakening for ourselves as a nation and a reflection of who we are and the roots of our nation. As we look at that, and as we look at the statements that came out of that, as we look at the conversations that have come out of that, we talked last week about collecting Black people, collecting people of color to prove that you are progressive, to prove progressive, right? The fact that we have to use that to prove that you acknowledge other people's humanity. It's problematic. So we're wanting to look at what it means to be in these first steps, but to be in these first steps in a way that is honest, to be in these first steps in a way that provides connection, and to be in these first steps in a way that allows us to be accountable for the rest of the journey, right?
Yep.
Yes, we can celebrate ourselves for this first step. We don't get to stop at celebration. Ooh, I put up a statement. Woo, we hired some people, woo, guilty. It's like, okay, yes, yes, and
Yes, and
yes, but yes, still coming to work and having to navigate all of these spaces because majority of leadership or majority of the system, right? Those who've been affected by the system and uplifted by the system of supremacy don't always have to voice how they're feeling and are not always impacted in the same way. I said before, we are not the same, and that is okay. But we have to be mindful of what it means to share space with others who are not the same as us. So that's my overall approach to step one.
I'm sorry I got cut off, folks. Internet issues. Technology always seems to be betraying us these days, so I had to do some things.
We're trying.
But I'm with Quo on this one. I think this episode is aptly named. There is a lot to do, not only in our organizations, but within our homes, within ourselves, within our society, within our church houses, wherever we are, there's a lot to do. Um, this this week has brought up a lot of emotions and a lot of feelings. And what I don't want to happen with people, and I've said this before, don't go to sleep. Nesun dorma. Don't go to sleep. It is okay to take a breath, but we are very much still in the throes of this. We cannot act like this is one issue and that has been taken care of and that it's not a product of a system.
Yeah.
So this is the one time where the system has done something right. But I will say this, in the history of this country, the system has not been above sacrificing somebody within their system in order to not enact real change. So
Because it is
we're
not
not,
meant for any of us. The system is not meant for any of us. So yes, it will absolutely sacrifice. Yes, it will
yes,
absolutely uphold itself by getting rid of those who are threatening the system, right? That's what it
yeah.
means.
So
Yeah.
this is the man had the book thrown at him as it should have been. There's not been any sentencing yet, but so we will see what would come out of that. But I want us to be clear that now is not the time to sleep. It's
Yeah.
not. And if you think that this doesn't affect your arts organizations, you don't think this affects your business, you don't think this affects the communities that you are saying that you are wanting to serve and that you are trying to serve, it does. And you do a disservice by putting the thing down just because one thing for once was done right.
Yeah.
Because there's been a history and a preponderance of evidence that says that this is might be rare, but it also know that when somebody does one thing right, that does not excuse the rest of the bad behavior that has been happening up until that point and the bad behavior that will continue to happen as a result of a system that has been put in place. So I want to
Mhm.
be very clear on that today. And I say that because we are now moving into a space in our organizations where we are in planning. We are trying to get back to our stages, our traditional stages. We're figuring out how we create a hybrid of our digital stages and our traditional stages, and then also our stages of going outdoors and performing. What those look like, what that looks like under COVID, how to redefine this art form and the way we have traditionally approached it. Well, that also means how you traditionally approach the people that are affected by the system. And so I will say this, there are going to be a lot of people who are not going to continue as business as usual. It can't.
Yeah.
Too
It
much
can't.
has happened. Too many things have had light shed on them. And so if you start ignoring those things in favor of, I got to get this budget done, I got to get this season planned, I got to get these events done, you're going to go right back into the hole that you were in before the pandemic. And let me be very clear, getting back to normal was not so great for some of us.
Yeah. I
And
wouldn't even
so
say not so great. It was horrible.
it was absolutely
And
atrocious. I was trying to be kind.
I mean, we can be
Right.
kind. It's possible to be kind and then to center truth. We can center truth and connection and so also being kind. It was not the best space, even in realizing what is happening and the fact that these systematic and systemic oppressions, systems of oppression are very real. Even in realizing that, it's still not the best space because it requires so much of those who are living those experiences to share, to educate, to express, to tap
Yes.
into, to open up, to present, and then to go somewhere else and then have to deal with it. Right. So it's not
Or not
just
even
in the
that,
space.
quote. I'm gonna drop this one flying over. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No,
you
go
said
for it.
something. But also to go into spaces and pretend like it's not going on.
To
Going
pretend
into
like it's not
spaces where
going
business
on.
is rolling as usual, and you're sitting there and your heart is breaking,
Yeah.
or your body is weary and tired.
Or
Okay.
to be in spaces that celebrate so much that they mute and they silence those who are still needing to express and reveal the issues within the system. It's like, oh no, we did that. We're done. So in this and us looking at step one, we're wanting to make sure that we understand that it's step one. This is just the beginning.
That's
This
again.
is just the beginning, and it will get more difficult as people begin to respond in very human ways, right? We'll get to the psychological and emotional aspect, human ways to the threat of whom they believe they are, how they see the world. So much so, more so, how they see the world and the things that we've been taught, which we've seen it. We've seen it in responses to so many of the statements, so many of the ways that companies are wanting to stand for their communities, for their staff members. So in this, as we're looking at step one, the goal is to provide some additional support in this first step. Acknowledging, as Kristian said, don't sleep because there are people who actually are losing sleep because these are not things that can just be dismissed so that we can talk about budgets, so that we can talk about going on stage, so that we can talk about engaging new board members, knowing that environments are hostile or are not supportive of differences. There are differences within the space, but the particular cultural differences of gender identity, of all of the other ways that we identify ourselves, because we don't practice holistic celebration as an industry. Pick and choose what is beneficial for us at the time, right? I need you and your identity in this moment. I need you to turn it off. I need you to turn it down just a bit when we're in this meeting or when we're dealing with something else. And so we want to be mindful of the ways that we are influenced by the systematic and systemic oppression, but we also want to be mindful of the ways that we get to influence these systems as well. So it's not completely hopeless, as always, me being the obnoxiously optimistic, right? It's not completely hopeless, but there's a responsibility in the ways in which we approach this. Yes, guilty. Yes, because he was, because he is, because we saw it. What are we as organizations guilty of? What are we as arts administrators guilty of? And not to ever compare the things that we do with someone's life being taken. But what are we guilty of in the environments that we create, in the audition processes that we present, in the ways that we say you have to meet these types of requirements that truly don't serve anyone in order for you to have a say in this art form? What are we guilty of? What is our step one?
Your approach to something is a little differently than we would have approached it traditionally, but it's getting the job done. So what does that mean? It's
Best
opening up a new way. Best practices. We fall into the best practices hole all the time.
And
the
to
thing
speak to
is that when you have a diversity of thought,
yeah.
when you have diversity of culture, when you have diversity of mind, body type, all this kind of stuff in the room, you're supposed to do things in a different way and not traditionally. That's the beauty of having multiple folks from multiple different backgrounds, multiple different perspectives in the room. And 9 times out of 10, it's more efficient.
And in looking at this, as we bring up best practices, right? Want to be mindful so that we can break this down, because this is how we look at things when we're looking at equitable spaces. Best practices are practices that have been presented and proven over a certain amount of time. And so it has been proven, or it has been accepted, kind of like culture, without being codified, right? Kind of like culture, that this is how this should be done. Who was making all the decisions when this was being formed?
That's it.
They didn't look like me. They didn't look like Kristian. They didn't look like a lot of people, right? Who was making those decisions? So if all of our decisions for best practices only come from one type of experience or one commonality, right, and experiences of being white and of being uplifting the fallacy of white supremacy, then as we look at best practices and the things that we are guilty of when we simply adhere to best practices without questioning the narrative, without questioning whom else is not in the room, without questioning who is being locked out and who is being dismissed and who is being tokenized, then as we adhere to best practices without question, we're adhering to the fallacy of white supremacy. And this is of a structure, this is of a system, not individuals, right? So we want to make that very clear. But this system does not serve any of us. We know what it's like, regardless of how we look or how we come into the space, for us to feel as if we're not being uplifted, to feel as if we're not being supported, to feel as if our mistake makes us a mistake, which is one of the symptoms of perfectionism, which is a cultural characteristic of white supremacy system, right? And what it means for you to have to be perfect, and what it means for people to hoard the power, hoard the decision-making, fear of open conflict. You don't want to have a conversation about it. Everybody should just be kind and be nice and go over to the side. But whose comfort is that protecting? And the idea that you have a right to comfort. So as we look at all of these best practices and understanding what they actually uphold, we have to ask the question, as an organization, as organizations, as an industry, what are we guilty of?
Yep.
What things have been in place and have continued to happen over decades And then suddenly it's coming to light. If we were to be placed within the situation, what would the verdict be? Are we guilty of standing in what is right and then of shaping ourselves to make sure that we're learning and that we're combating these culture norms and that we're creating spaces where people actually know that they know that they know that opera belongs to them as well, that opera belongs to all of us? Are we guilty of gatekeeping, of dismissing identities? Are we guilty of dismissing cultures? Are we guilty of using cultures for our own benefit because we want to sell tickets? Are we guilty of continuously falling into patterns that we know are not positive for us as an industry? Yes, we are. Those are my answers. I can't be, judge and jury, but
Well, no, and it's not that you're being judge or jury. This is what you've observed in this field, is what I've observed in this field. We are studiers of opera. We know this art form. We know the roots. We know the industry, so it's not something that we're making up. We're not asking these questions because we don't know the answer. We're asking these questions because we do know the answers. But sometimes it's that moment of evaluation of what are we guilty of. And I agree. I say that to myself too. That is that self-examination that we talk about all the time. Organizations are made up of people, so the people must examine themselves. Why am I here? How am I doing my job daily? Am I doing it in a way that is equitable and fair? Am I doing it in a way that takes into account other people's situations and their feelings and their workloads and all of those things? And we have to be very careful, especially in a time like this where we are trying to figure out, how do we operate post-pandemic? What do we do? How do we divide up work schedules? How do we start reassessing and reshaping our teams to be in this digital era, in addition to bringing back opera to the traditional stage? All of these types of things have to be asked. How are we treating our artists?
Mm-hmm.
Our artists have been very outspoken in the past year. And as an artist myself, I know what it's like to have that sort of be quiet, be nice, don't really say anything, don't rock the boat so you can get hired and all this stuff. And especially true if you're a person of color. It's most definitely true for you. And so all of these things that we have to do, but there have been a lot of times where artists have taken things that they should not have had to take in order to try to get a foot in the door in this business. There are times where artists have been in completely inequitable situations, where they have walked into the audition room and might not have been as dressed as well as somebody else, or as quote unquote articulate as someone else. And nobody asked the question of, well, wait a minute, let's look at the systems. Okay, and that's what we have been spouting for a year, over a year, almost a year. Okay, next week will be episode 52. We would have been doing this for 52 weeks, asking the questions of what preset or preconceived notions do you have of that artist before they walk in the room? When you see that headshot, all of those things. And if you think that it doesn't drum up in your mind, or those things don't cross your mind, I could line up artists. I wouldn't put them out there like that right now, but I could line up artists and tell you about some of the experiences that they have had in the audition process, in the rehearsal process, all of these different things. I had a young man, I judged a competition. I won't call his name, but I had a young man was driving in and had to change the tire on his car, okay, on the way in. And his suit got dirty and his hands got dirty. And I have a feeling that if the panel that I was with hadn't been the panel that we were, somebody would have judged him. We did not. Young man had to change a tire. His hands were dirty and he sang his face clean off. He was fantastic. Okay. But many people would have said, look at that smudge on his shirt. Oh, he don't even have a tie on. Well, sorry, the tie got grit on it. So he went tieless instead. It's these types of things where you ask questions, ask real questions of people so you know who they are, where they come from. It is, and it's so vitally important right now as we are having these conversations of what the look of a role is. Get those things out of your mind. The world looks different. It's made up of all different types of people. This is going to be a new approach for the opera world. That Violetta that you would cast might not be the traditional Violetta. I'm not saying that that person should not be vocally sound, that the diction should not be on point. I'm not talking about compromising artistic quality. Let me be very clear.
And then let's be clear also about that. The false dichotomy right? And
Yeah.
the false assumption that getting someone who does not look like the role means that they are not fit to do the role, technique wise, all of these other things, that is false. Let's be
That is
real
false.
clear about that. When you say that, what you're really saying is, I don't like the way you look. You don't sell it for me, which is coming from a place of bias. We all have our own biases, right? And what it looks like. You're judging based on your bias. And this is not simply about you and what you want to see as much as it's about who can tell the story. And stories
Yeah.
can be told to different communities in different ways. So let's drop the assumption and that false space of, oh, this individual, which most of the time is a person of color, let's be honest about that. We're going to be honest and connected in this space, right? It's our space together.
Mm-hmm.
That that means that there's less technique. We had so many instances of that recently, in that as people are calling out competitions and winners of competitions, and people are responding and saying, oh, well, there goes the quality. That's a form of white supremacy, to assume that those who do not or are not racialized as white automatically will bring less quality. That is what you're saying. So what are we guilty of? That is the question that we have to ask. Those are the things that we have to admit to ourselves. And even in other spaces where it may not just be a matter of a person of color, but in what are we saying? What are we deeming as superior, as normal? Are we looking at technique? Are we looking at the actual quality of the singing? Are you looking at the fact that you don't feel like this person fits this particular role because of whatever bias you have for yourself? Not because the audience won't get it, not because the audience won't be able to see it, not because it's not traditional. Again, which is also what's problematic about only presenting traditional pieces. The men, because we do a lot of male repertoire, who created these pieces did not have access to everyone. So their idea of the pieces and the works are shaped in their idea in their era. Bringing this to 2021 in the United States of America.
Bringing
Yeah,
it to the
there is
United States when it came over in the 1800s was still they okay,
there
I'm
is
just
no
gonna say it.
excuse.
Folks might have been enslaved, okay? You might have stolen somebody's land, but it still was a melting pot.
If
You're still
there is
getting
no
art
there
form
is,
into a place where people look different. So if
so
you're and from different backgrounds, so if you're going to bring a European art form to the United States, you should cast it for a United States audience. Maybe you should cast it so it looks like the United States. Hmm.
and also breaking it down again to the root of what we do, we tell stories. We
Tell
tell
stories.
stories. So that just means we have to open the space so that we can tell more stories. We have to open our minds and of hearts. Of course, this is heart's work. Let's not negate that, and our policies so that we can support the heart work, because sometimes heart work kind of oscillates. We're just going to be real about that, right? In this, as we open our minds, as we open our hearts, as we open our imaginations, and as we open the structure so that we can continue to tell stories. This is about the art form connecting with others. And if you continuously have communities saying, I don't appreciate this, I don't appreciate the way that I am being represented, where am I? If you
Mm-hmm.
continuously have someone telling you that, asking you those things, then that means we have to again question, what are we guilty of?
Well, and another thing, uh, on top of that, when the community does ask that question, and then they go away, and then you find yourself in a pickle where you can't sell tickets, and you can't find you find yourself in a problem of filling those seats, and then you start tokenizing folks and trying to get them to go to the communities. That is not an authentic approach.
Mhm. Mhm.
You moving to communities of color and trying to do outreach or engagement with community colors should not be a desperate attempt to put more butts in seats.
More butts and seeds.
But it's the truth. And so we have to
Mhm.
be very careful about how we are in our casting, how we are working with our community, and how we truly want to engage with them. You
Yeah.
have to authentically engage with people. You have
Yeah.
to have the culture of humility to go and say, we were wrong. What do you need? How do
But,
we do this? Because a lot of us are guilty of that in
right.
this industry.
Right.
Okay, and I know this because I've sat in the room where it's happened, and I've had to put the brakes on it and say, wait a minute, what are we really doing here?
And then the question then becomes like, what message are we sharing with others? Are we letting others know that they can kind of borrow this art form and rent this space just a bit when we need them? Your invitation has limitations? Or are we
Mm.
saying that opera belongs to you as well? Right? We've said it before, opera is a huge art form. It can fit more stories. We said this with Latino women in opera. It can fit more stories. It can fit more experiences. What messages are we sending to everyone when we say, oh, I only need you in the space here? I only need you not to be comfortable, but to be uplifted, to be challenged, to be reflected through the art. Only at this time here. What messages are we actually sending to our communities? And are we actually creating co-ownership and co-creation? Or are we simply picking and choosing when we want to engage with others? And of course, we cannot be all things to all people. Let's get rid of
No
that false
problem.
dichotomy as well. We cannot be all things to all people. That is not what this call is about. This is acknowledging that step one is making sure that we understand that we ourselves are guilty of things. And that simply acknowledging that is, yes, cause for celebration. That is not cause for us to pause the work that we're doing, or for us to stop the work that we're doing, or for us to spend so much time celebrating ourselves and the incremental changes that we're making, that we continue to dismiss the very real needs of our staff, of our artists, and of our audiences. So as we continue to share, right, that's us framing what it all is. I'd like to also go through the process of what strengthening step one looks like, because there are so many more steps to this. And of course, we'll get through that in our journey. But ways in which we can truly create belonging in the space, very simple ways. One, if your organization has not done so, look into your history.
Mm-hmm.
Look into the original inhabitants, cultivators, and lovers of the land. That is step one, first and foremost. And it's such a simple thing that you can do as an organization in acknowledging that truth, and in truth telling and in narrative sharing in a way that really allows people to come into the space together. As individuals and as organizations, you can begin all of your introductions as a person with your name, your pronouns, the land that you are on, and then what the land is called now, right? So we want to be mindful of just the simple ways that we can start to do that. Other ways that we can create belonging in this step one, because it's going to need to have a connection in order for us to move forward, right? In this step one is also making sure that we're holding space. Kristian said that this week has been heavy. What does it mean for your staff members who are disproportionately affected? We're all affected. We're all impacted by this. What does it mean for us to hold space together to talk about it? And not hold space to say how shocked we are. And I use we loosely. Not hold space for those who are normally more comfortable to say that they're uncomfortable, but hold space for those who are normally uncomfortable to be able to breathe, to take a breath, to prioritize those who are disproportionately affected by these things in negative ways, and then to hold space for everybody else who normally doesn't have to deal with it, to suddenly share space with someone who does. Intentionally, deep listening, those types of things. These are simple ways that our step one can propel us forward to step two, but understanding that we're still very much in the beginning. This is one verdict. We're still very much in the beginning of how many hashtags, of how many names, acknowledging that as a Black woman, that hashtag means something different to me. That's a different shadow for me than it is for others, right? As Black men, that's a different shadow for them than it is to others, and what it means to have to consider what that looks like for us, right? So even as we hold space together, making sure that we get into the practice of shifting ourselves within the space. We said before, some spaces I do not speak because it is not my role to speak. It is not my experience. It is my job to uplift others as a witness, to uplift others in support, to uplift others in the hopes of being an ally. We talked about you cannot call yourself an ally. Other people have to acknowledge it of you. So these are simple tips, tools, and of course I'll share them on my Instagram for people to take with them. But just being mindful of, as we are creating these beautiful stories together, we have to be able to create the space to acknowledge the truth and where we are. We're step one, and that is good.
Well, Well, and I also want to add a little to that because you said, creating space for people to acknowledge these things and bear some of the weight as well. But I would also say individuals in organizations, within organizations, you as an individual have a responsibility as well. If you need to create to create that space as well, talk to your colleagues of color, check on them. The reason why I say that, and I'm not saying that in terms of going, how you doing today, and then turning it on yourselves, but understand that when you arrive in a space with them, understand that they might be coming into that space a little differently. And so that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's your responsibility to take on the problems of the world, but it is your responsibility as an individual because organizations are made up of people to also understand that it cannot be just on leadership or just on certain people to take that on. It has to be a collective effort of people saying, you know what, I let's go see about somebody if they're okay. And I don't think that's telling you to do something that's drastic or a radical or anything. I just think it's saying, it's okay for us to be human beings and leaders. You have to create the environment for your employees, for your people to feel like they can do that with each other individually as well. I know it's a business. We say it all the time. Yes, it's a business. We know that. I'm not a fool. Okay. But it's also a business and an organization that is made up of human beings that have real feelings, real problems, real issues, but also can experience also real joy, real happiness, real connection with each other. So there has to be room for that, and it's going to look and feel different
Mm-hmm.
because most workspaces is I go in, I do my job, I do this, I come home. Well, I'm sorry, but in the arts, we wear our emotions on our sleeves because we are storytellers. Whether we tell it through dance, visual art, opera, whatever it is, it's there. Okay, we feel deeply, and that's why we are good at storytelling. So I just also say create that environment where people can say something to each other and
Mm-hmm.
can talk to each other and go and not feel like um, they're weak or something for doing that.
Yeah,
So I just wanted to
fighting
point that
right,
out.
fighting that cultural characteristic of objectivity
Yes, yes,
and the
and
expectation
perfectionism. I
and
gotta be.
perfectionism and the
Yeah,
expectation that people are supposed to be objective in all spaces, especially when we're
yeah,
discussing something that has very real effects on our lives. And then especially when we're picking and choosing who can be objective at what point, right?
yes,
We talked about it before. We know the stories of conductors who are so passionate that they
yeah,
throw things. Right? When do we get to be objective? Who gets to be objective? Who gets to
yep,
be the angry black woman? Who gets to be too passionate that you're almost hostile? Oh, you're scaring me. Those types of things. So as
yep.
we're creating these spaces, step one requires that we acknowledge, yes, it is an issue, that we acknowledge that we are not where we think we are. And that is okay because that means we know where we want to go. And in knowing where we want to go, that means that we have the opportunity to create the foundation, the connection, and the support systematically so that it does become systemic in that, so that it becomes self-sustaining in the ways that we create community. And then I encourage everyone as we are looking at this, not just in opera, but imagine how this expands to everything else. Everything
Yeah.
that's happened this week, not much has had very many things to do with opera, but look at how much we are affected by it, even in this industry. So I encourage everyone to extend this concept, this step one, this commitment, which is what it is, this commitment to making sure that we continue and that we don't sleep, that we don't take the time like, oh, yay, us, and put it down. Extend that into what it means for education. Extend that into what it means for health. Extend that in what it means for HR. Extend that into what it means for the different ways that our art form intersects with so many other communities, so many other industries, right? It starts there, and then it's our ability to keep going. It's our ability to acknowledge where we are, and then knowing that the journey continues.
It's a marathon, folks. Okay, it is not a sprint. Okay, this is well meticulously thought out, planned out, and we must pace ourselves, but we must pace ourselves in a way that is effective. Pacing yourself does not mean sitting down. It's a constant move toward the right thing. So that's
Yeah,
where we are right now.
it's not
Uh,
over.
it's
It's
not over.
it's not
It's
over.
not over.
This is step one. This is the beginning. It's not over.
No, it's not over, and not by a long shot. And we saw that on the very same day. So, and whatever your opinions and feelings about that, it's still going to show us, and we have a lot of work to do. So this is step one. We have, and like I said, over the past year, there has been progress. There have been conversations, but it's
Yeah.
still very much step one.
Yeah.
It's not done just because one right thing happened.
Yeah.
So we have to acknowledge that, and as an industry, we need to use this again to continue to look at ourselves because we are simply a microcosm of society. Okay, whatever is out in the, I know we like our little opera bubble, but that has to be shattered as well because real life happens around our bubble. So let's just poke a hole in it so that so we can go on and really talk about these things because it affects the people inside of that bubble. All
Hmm.
right, affects people that are inside that bubble, and really affects everybody inside that bubble. If you really want to
Everyone.
be
And that's
real,
the
it's affected
point.
by everybody.
The system does not serve anyone.
No,
Again, we've talked about it before, and as we're seeing how so many are asking, well, what do I do? How do I talk to people? Well, I can't seem to say the right thing. Those are not my intentions. The system has dubbed, right? Has snubbed all of us
lie. It's a lie. It
from.
was a lie.
Yeah, the system has robbed all of us of our ability to connect as human beings and of our ability to see things as they truly are in a
And of
way
our
that does
voice.
not prioritize our own comfort and then does not prioritize the comfort of those who are most supported by the system. And this is a system of white supremacy. This is a system of male patriarchy. This is a system of oppression in so many different ways. Those are only two. Those are only two, right? We get into ableism, we get into gender identity, we get into a lot of other things. Those are only two that really, really, really kind of uphold so many of the other barriers that we have. Know that it is not working for us. It has never worked for everyone. It worked for a few who did not care what was happening to everybody else.
Everybody else. Woo!
It works
Did
for a few.
not care. They did not care, and they fooled a bunch of people into thinking that they did.
Yeah.
If you don't believe me, there's a quote by LBJ. I don't have to say it on here, okay? But look for it. And it's horrible.
Yeah.
It really is horrible because they really did not care about anybody, and that includes poor white men.
Yeah.
They did
Yeah.
not care. They
Who did
did
not
not
care because
care.
they did not have to because
They
capitalism.
didn't have to
That's a whole
because
other
capitalism and their
conversation.
pockets were fat. But anyway, I digress. So, just to sort of wrap this thing up, this was a heavy week. It's been a heavy, really honestly, the past 13, 14 months have been extremely heavy for more than one reason. But I will tell you this, as somebody who can relate to this in a different way, and my colleague here can relate to it in a completely different way than most. It has been very trying in the past 4 or 5 weeks as all of this has been going on, and you could feel a collective breath that was inhaled and then exhaled
And then inhaled again.
and then inhaled not even minutes later, and it's scary and it's exhausting, but we must press on some way somehow. But we must press on, not back to what we did before, but press on in this new world that we are trying to form that we have not seen yet, that we are approaching completely differently. But we have to press on in that. So that means accountability. Okay. That means making sure you are taking those small steps that Quo gave you. Quo gave you two really great starts of how to do this. So when we take this off and turn this off from live and put the episode back up, rewind and listen to those steps that we gave you in that third one that I gave you. Because I say again, I believe creating that environment where your people can feel free to talk with each other and check in on each other is very, very important, and it is vital right now in a way, since we are all still pretty much isolated. Not as much anymore. We're starting to get vaccinations and all that kind of stuff, but I think it's vitally important um, for the health of the organization, for the mental health of the organization, all of it. And then that turns into the financial health of the organization and the viability and sustainability of the organization. But it has to be organic. So those are my rants. Quo made very good points with the, like I said, with the steps, but also with the accountability aspect of this, with the fact that this is the beginning, and also asking us what we're guilty of. That was a great direction to take, because we do need to ask ourselves that question, and I say that individually, as organizations, and as a society. And yeah, so with that, we're going to turn it over to Quo for some positive notes, because even in what seemingly is a lot of darkness, there's always a silver lining somewhere. We just have to look for it.
Positive notes, as always. Before I get to positive notes, those who are in the space, feel free, of course, as always, to drop in your comments and your questions, to share your experiences, and we'll make sure we acknowledge that as well in this shared space. Positive notes for this particular episode, in this particular space right here in this time. This week has been heavy in so many ways, and just as we expected something good to come, it requires that we acknowledge all of the things that led to us having to hold our breath in the first place. It requires that we acknowledge all of the trauma that has come out of centuries of being isolated and of being separated and of being dehumanized. All of us, all of us. This is for everybody. This is what racism does. It dehumanizes. That is the point, to dehumanize every single person, not just one group, even in the false hierarchy, right? Every single person. So as we're looking at what it means to kind of exhale after a year of holding our breath, of protests, of tears, of conversations, of uncomfortable conversations, of progress, of having to start over in so many ways, of understanding that we still don't get it, I encourage all of us to know that we are at the beginning, and that is okay. We are at the beginning, and we are building a stronger foundation for our beginning, for our first step. This is step one, so that as we continue in this journey, we are all the better for it. As we continue in this journey, we are all the stronger for it, because we know what it means to connect. We know what it means to have those difficult conversations, and then to allow the growth from those conversations to inform our decisions going forward. We know what it means. We know how it feels. As we said, it's contagious. I encourage everyone to take heart in knowing that it's okay to hold space, in knowing that it is okay to honor our emotions, to honor our humanity, and in knowing that this is how we get the work done. But the work continues, so do not sleep. Do not simply put it down and say, I'm done. Rest, of course, take care of yourself, but know that this is still the beginning. And again, that's the exciting part in so many ways. But if we don't move beyond this, it can be some of the exhausting things. So I have faith that as we continue to have these conversations, as we continue to foster these spaces, we'll get to where we need to go, and we'll get there together. And as always, you don't have to do it alone, right? Always reach out, always be honest and be bold in our vulnerability and how we come together, because that's what matters. And those are my positive notes.
All right. Positive notes with Quo. So, folks, as I always say, be bold, be creative, be human, be empathetic, be compassionate. Grace is not a dirty word. Also, but like I said, it's all part of being human and acknowledging the full human experience, and that is very much what we're all dealing with right now. So in this time where things are tough and they seem dark, hang in there. Artists, you are needed. You are
Yes.
loved.
Yes.
You are so needed right now. And when we come out of this thing, whatever way that pans out, you are going to be needed. You're needed right now. So keep your heads held up high, keep practicing, keep flipping open those scores, keep talking to each other, all of those things that we do. Well, look like you got
Yes,
something on
yes.
your head.
One of the things that are that's so important in this space, and I want us to all practice this, and I want to give a message to those who are carrying this weight in our different ways, right? We see you, we hear you,
I hear you.
we are here with you and sharing space and holding space in ways that you need. It's so important that you know this as an individual. It's so important that we know this collectively, and what it means to be in spaces where someone says, I see you, I hear you, I value you, I hold space with and for you. So know that we are
Feel
doing
you.
that.
We feel you as
I
well.
do.
So take care of yourselves, take care of each other. And like I said, you are needed, you are loved, you are adored. And we are ever so grateful for all of you artists that have been making it, for you arts administration who have been pulling double time, for all the donors and supporters and everybody that have been trying to keep us in play. We're very grateful. Um, so we've got work to do, folks. It's continuous, all right? We will press on. And until next time, we'll see you next time around. Peace out.
Bye.